Hey there, I know you're used to seeing our faces, but this week we had a few technical issues. As a result, while there will be video later in the episode for our interview, our intro this week is audio only. Now let's get into the show. Hey there, beautiful people. Welcome back to Black Queer Canon. I'm Mikelle Street.
And I'm Tre'vell Anderson. We are your hosts with one clear vision in mind: to put some respect on Black LGBTQ characters.
Yes, every episode of this inaugural season, we've been building out our very own canon of the film and television characters that have paved the way when it comes to Black, queer, and trans narratives on screen. And along the way, we've been joined by folks with a special connection to these characters who've helped us tease it all out. Tre'vell, tell us who else is joining the canon this week.
Yes. This week we are inducting into the canon Noxeema Jackson, one of the lead characters in 1995's To Wong Foo, Thanks for Everything, Julie Newmar, which has to be the longest film title ever. Like, what's going on, gay people? Maybe she's a drag queen. Maybe she's a woman. We'll talk more about that shortly. But she definitely is played by Wesley Snipes. I wanted to start our conversation here at this point of like, why did we require a drag kind of character or representation on this canon? Because I feel like that was a necessity when we first set out on this path. We knew that somebody was gonna be wearing a dress.
That's funny. I didn't think about that when we started. I think I was just thinking about characters and thinking about characters that people think of when they think of Black queerness. Mm-hmm. And I think that you can kind of, whether people love it or not, you kind of inextricably link drag with queerness, right?
Mm-hmm,
and
absolutely.
This kind of idea that I often think that drag is one of the queer art forms that's known to be a queer art form, right? And so I think it kind of has to do with that. And then it's been interesting because over the span of the pod, the interview that we had with Justin Simeon, right, brings a new layer to it, right, around the fact that, like, Black men in drag that's been a part of, what we've been doing for Black humor for a very long time. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like when we're thinking of archetypes of Black, gay, queer, even trans representation, drag is central to that, right? Because even the straight people who get up in, drags, as it were, even the straight people who cross-dress for various different roles often also have to deal with some sort of questions or commentary about, who they sleeping with, right? Or who they might be interested in. From Tyler Perry to Martin Lawrence to Jamie Foxx, etc., right? And so I also think that when in kind of a stereotypical way we think of the ways that the community has been represented, it is often this, hyper feminized, beauty, if you will, that I think drag and it kind of oozes in a particular way. And so, when people think about some of their earliest kind of representations and thoughts of Black, queer, and trans people, right? Someone like a RuPaul often comes to mind, right? At that intersection, which I think is really, really interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting also because we specifically also really wanted a queer drag character, right?
Certainly.
Like, to your point, there's so many characters that are not supposed to be queer, or the characters are not drag characters, even though we know them to be men in drag, right? And so you have all of these characters that are straight men that for whatever reason get into drag, for some other purpose that doesn't have to do with like an art form, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have characters like Shanae, right? Which that's not a
Yes.
that is a man in drag,
Uh-huh.
but that is not the character is
Not a drag
a
queen.
cis woman,
Yes.
right? And so I think we didn't want those other two. We wanted the character that was a character that's a drag persona that is doing it for the art form.
Mm-hmm.
And when you get to those characters, they're not as common
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
as the other two that I just mentioned.
And I think, right, a character that falls right in line. I mean, we should know RuPaul. I feel like is that in a particular kind of space, right? RuPaul was in Crooklyn. Shout out to Spike Lee. It had that moment of visibility, with the culture. And I feel like also is someone people think of when they're thinking about visibility and representation, even though I mean, I guess Rue has done some acting as either a different kind of character, you know what I mean, or either as themselves. Sister. That when they was on Sister, they had a little role on Sister.
I mean, Rue. The thing is, Rue did that's how she made her name, right? These vanity cameos in so many projects, even into Wong Foo, she had one, right? She was in the Brady Bunch movie, I think. She did everything. But the characters may or may not have had a name, may or may not have been on the screen, more than
30 seconds.
Yeah, more than a minute or two. But this is an aside. But that's why Drag Race is set up the way that it is, right? Is that like she's teaching these girls how to repeat her success and how do you go in, do a one scene situation, steal the scene, and have the girls right like wanting to book you for another one scene moment. So, but we did have a conversation about Rue and whether Rue was the character. But when you think about these characters, Rue as an individual, right, is probably as an actress, as a performer, is the archetype, right? Is the one that people would point to. But as a character,
Right.
Noxeema is fleshed out, and you get to know and live with her for much more than you really did the lion's share of any of Rue's drag characters, save the recent
AJ
Ruby
and the
Red
Queens.
in AJ and the Queen, which great drag performances in that, and I'll leave that at that.
Shout out to the drag performances.
I love a drag performance.
I do want to hit one other quick thing. And I know we'll get into this with our interview with our guest, but this drag archetype is also an archetype that I think is often, at least present day, a space where folks talk about the potential of trans representation showing up, even though, to be clear, Noxeema Jackson is a drag queen, textually at least, but talking a little bit about the ways, right, that various folks in community have looked at these characters and found some slither of representation, right, and identifying with, and how that kind of blends these worlds of kind of performance and the art of drag with also trans, identity.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so interesting to have these conversations. Like you said, there's a one hand where whether or not this character is a drag queen or a trans woman textually, or any other kind of representation, to be frank, people take from it what they need and what they want, and
Absolutely.
can fashion you into a possibility model, even though you aren't the thing that they need you to be, and so they kind of make you that thing. And so I think that's totally valid. And I also think a little bit of it is that sometimes I'm like, I don't know that the writers knew. I don't know that the writers were contending. They weren't sure
Certainly
about those
not.
differences. Particularly if you're thinking about, prior to 95,
Mm-hmm.
99, the 2000s, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
I think that I don't know that a lot of them knew the difference,
Mm-hmm.
and wrote in a way that distinguished the difference. I think a little bit about the difference between, not a black film, but uh, so To Wong Foo and Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, and like
Mm-hmm.
that. There's an Australian film that came out, I think, a year or two before To Wong Foo,
Yeah.
and that one, we do see the girls get out of drag. It's clear that
Right.
some of them are gay men, and I
Right.
think one of them is probably a trans woman, and so I can't remember the specifics. So if she says it, then like don't come for me. But the writers behind that clearly had a
Yeah.
more involved, nuanced approach, as opposed to these characters. Sometimes I'm like, I think that's the writer thought that that's what they would do. They probably thought that's how
Yeah.
it works. That they just like
Yeah.
never got out. So
Yeah, and I do think there is that one scene in Tu Wong Fu where they're in the car. Noxeema says when a straight man puts on a dress and gets his sexual kicks, he is a transvestite. When a man is a woman trapped in a man's body and has a little operation, he is a transsexual. And when a gay man has way too much fashion sense for one gender, he is a drag queen. And when a tired little Latin boy puts on a dress, he is simply a boy in a dress. So I love that scene because
right.
it's one of those scenes where you see kind of the motherly side, right, of this character, or maybe auntie. Maybe she gives cutting auntie and not mother per se. But
Right.
you see that kind of coming across in this scene that's really about the community, right, building that's happening there. What about for you?
Yeah. For me, I love the scene when they're like coming out. They're in that little town that they go to. They're coming out of the house, and the boys are trying to crack jokes on the queens and the women, and she goes
Mm-hmm.
over and grabs him by his family jewels,
Come on,
and
cojones.
and straightens him out. And there's something, again, like you said, that is a little black auntie about it.
Mm-hmm.
That there's this level of refinement, but also a level of, okay, but you still can't fuck with me. Like,
That part.
I had a she had all these rings, and I had an aunt who had the golds and the
Mm-hmm.
rings, and we always knew that if it needed to go there, it could go there. And so
Mm-hmm.
it reminded me a little of that. And we're gonna kick to the interview in a second, but I wanted to give you a second, since we haven't talked about him at all. Talk about one of your favorite characters, from Holiday Heart, and if there was anything you
Oh,
wanted to say about them in this conversation.
oh my God, Holiday Heart, very special place. In my heart, no pun intended. Shout out to Ving Rhames. Shout out to Alfred Woodard. Okay, bless her, bless her. Sorry. I just really love this movie. I feel like it doesn't get enough play. We don't talk about that character and what it represents, even in this drag arc type, right, in this which has the motherly aspect as well, right, which also has the sassy best friend caretaker energy, right, as well. I maybe because it was a TV movie, people don't think
Mhm.
about it much,
Right.
but Holiday Heart, you want to talk about canon, okay? Stop playing with me, okay?
Well, this is a great place for us to take our break. When we come back, we'll be joined by the one and only Jazzmun. Welcome back to Black Queer Canon. Joining us to get into all things Noxeema Jackson is actress, advocate, and producer Jazzmun. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here, Jazzmun. If y'all don't know Jazzmun, you should know this is a legend icon in our midst. Okay, we are grateful that you are here. To get us started in this conversation, if you could, take us back to your first time watching To Wong Foo. What stands out? What do you remember about this film, the character of Noxeema, when you first saw it?
When I first saw To Wong Foo, I was elated. I was full of joy.
Mm-hmm.
I thought, wow, what a choice for the actors to make, right? To be a part of a project that required examination, investigation, and exploration, right? So I know some work had to go into it, but I know specifically Wesley Snipes, that wasn't his first time in drag, because he also did the play about Boom Boom, the Sister of Perpetual Indulgence. He played her in a play.
Okay.
With, oh God, I can't remember the other actor. So it wasn't his first time doing drag. So, but the fact that he was willing, to explore drag again, he gets kudos in my book. Right?
Absolutely.
Because, there's a lot of stigma and resistance to femininity. And so for them to explore it in such a creative, lovely, inviting way, right? I thought, job well done.
Yeah.
On all actors' parts.
And I remember when I was writing my book, We See Each Other, A Black Trans Journey Through TV and Film, available wherever you get wonderful books. I was doing a lot of research about To Wong Foo as a movie, and Wesley Snipes in particular. I remember, everyone remarking, even though he had this prior experience doing drag, being so surprised that, this manly man taking on this role. And one of the bits of history that I love is that, they were all trained by drag queens,
right?
Some who are also trans women that were drag performers at the time. And so they were able to, learn a little bit of the realness, if you will, from that experience. Mikelle, your first To Wong Foo experience.
I don't remember when I first saw it, but I know I didn't see it when I was like too young because we weren't allowed. But I do remember always, every time I see it, being so, I guess, in awe of what felt like the reverence in which they treated the art form of drag. You know what I mean? I think that, like, at that time and even before and maybe sometimes, after, drag was kind of, unless it was RuPaul, was a joke. And so, like, this for me is the first time I remember seeing, cross-dressing where it was like this really glamorous thing, where it wasn't bad drag, because I feel like bad drag was the shtick for a long time. And so, obviously at that time when I first watched it, I don't think we were really talking about, trans and all that sort of stuff. And now, so we talk about it and, whether or not these characters are trans and stuff. But I think at that time I was just so in awe of, like, this is really beautiful, which was just not a thing at that time. For the projects that I was seeing. Maybe there were some projects that I missed, but the projects that I was seeing, it wasn't like that.
I'm gonna circle back on that trans element you just mentioned. But first, I think, Noxeema fits into what we are calling this, like, drag archetype in terms of representations of Black folks, Black community in this context. And there are just so many, like you were mentioning, so many other instances in which folks are doing drag, cross-dressing, whatever language you want to call it, that have come to represent, I feel like, queerness within our community so much. Another one of the characters that comes to mind for me is Holiday Heart, right? I feel like when folks think, or at least at a particular time, when folks thought of queer people, of gay people, that kind of image is what came to mind in a lot of ways. And so to me, the reason why Noxeema is on this list is because that drag character, I think, is like, the mother, if you will. And then we see these other kind of iterations of Black drag characters pop up. And one of the ones that Mikelle and I at least have a very soft place in our heart for is a character that you played, okay, in Patrick Ian Polk's Punks, which for the young folks out there, okay, Punks was the precursor to Noah's Ark, okay, in case you don't know your history. But you played the character of Crystal, which, she's a drag character. She's busting up the space. I'd love for you to take us back to that era of your career, and specifically that kind of character, which you've played, drag characters, throughout your career. But what was kind of the thought process for you around that character and what you were trying to give back then?
Well, it was the first time I had an opportunity to be in a movie where I was considered a lead, right? Even if I was fifth, I was considered number 5, right?
Absolutely.
On the call sheet. So that was a big deal for me because prior to that, I guest starred and co-starred in numerous shows, right? But my character, I don't know, you didn't see it evolve or develop, right? I usually came in to say something or do something and to get the laugh or get, steal the scene or whatever it was called for in that moment. And I have no regrets doing any of it.
Okay.
I just want to be clear about that. People don't understand the process oftentimes. They're not giving out those roles at the unemployment office. You have to show up, and there's a table full of people judging you on one line, right? So, I never underestimate, what it takes to secure the gig.
Right.
Yeah. But I also, I'm a girl about action. So I stayed dancing in the nightclubs. And I used to impersonate celebrities like Whitney and Diana and Tina. And Janet was on my repertoire. And I had my own show at a club called The Backlot, which is part of a club called Studio One that was all the rage back then. And I did this whole tribute, the If dance, the If performance to Janet. And a friend of his that I knew, Patrick's, came to see me, Dalton, and invited Patrick to see me perform that piece.
Oh, wow.
And Patrick wanted me for his film, right then and there. But I had to go through, the channels, right? I had to meet with Babyface, I had to meet with Tracy. Like, they wanted to make sure, they're about to invest their coin, in this film. They want to make sure I was the right one. So they hired me. And it was the beginning of, something great for me, right? Because at that point, I didn't know what the next thing, as an actor, you don't know what the next thing is. And you're just hoping and praying and wishing that you get some, some role with grit or, or dimension for me, right? I wanted something that you can see me kind of evolve in or be layered in. And so that it afforded me the opportunity, and I got to still be myself to some degree. I got to be a showgirl. I knew about being a showgirl. My role took on a motherly role as well, right? So being supportive to my friends, and I got to change so many. I wore so many costumes and hair pieces and makeup, and just the set energy was phenomenal, right? I'm with all these great Black and brown artists. And I didn't know any of them, to be honest. Like, they all were from New York. And I was the only one from Los Angeles. So prior to shooting, Patrick got us, around each other a lot. Just so we could develop, conversation, right? And just know a little bit about each other. But people came with their A game. They were ready to work. And so, you had to show up and do what you agreed to do.
Right.
And I was like, let's do it. Let's do it. And so, we put in a lot. It was an indie film that we put a lot of work into. And it hurt, I'm going to be honest, that it didn't get the accolade. It got accolades, but it could have got more, and that a lot of people don't even know it because they never got the proper distribution. And so, I don't get to scream it from the mountaintops or, sometime, but the beautiful thing is a cult classic. So I've been invited to, when we were down for COVID, like, people had special screenings and would invite me. to be a part of the screening. I'm just thinking it did what it needed to do
Right.
Absolutely.
at the time that it played.
Yeah.
And the experience was absolutely phenomenal. We danced our asses off. We did all the dancing scenes at the El Rey. Everything, all the
down
club.
well, not down the street,
Yeah,
but
on Wilshire. Everything happened at the El Rey because I knew John Khalil and Rodney Nadar, who owned the facility at the time, and so they were generous, and kind, and allowed us to use the facility. But we put in a lot of effort, and oh my God, I can't remember the designer. She's gonna kill me, but she put her back into it, right? Like she sold everything, with her and Patrick's vision. They did an outstanding job in bringing their vision to life.
You mentioned this sort of aspect that I think is a through line throughout a lot of these characters, which is this maternal or some way sort of caregiving, right, aspect, right? It was your character, I think, most pronounced towards the end.
Yeah.
But then, obviously you see this in Noxeema, you see this in characters like Ruby in AJ and the Queen. She's, the nanny to this, well, essentially nanny to this little girl. Obviously this is in Holly Hart. And I'm curious, do you thread all of these characters together sort of do you see them as connected or versions of the same?
Connected and versions of the same. Like speaking the same truth, right? In solidarity and support and through love, right? The Black female archetype is the mother, right? Is the caretaker, is someone that is providing the love that is needed at any given moment. Even though everything is happening around them, they stay grounded and rooted in what needs to be done, right? So when I think of, even the famous actress that was in Gone with the Wind.
Was that Hattie McDaniel?
Hattie McDaniel,
Yeah.
right? She played a mother archetype,
right?
Absolutely.
So even Whoopi as the in Ghost was somewhat of a mother archetype. She's taking care of her family and through doing her magic and everything, but to keep it amongst these drag or these trans characters, we're totally connected.
Yeah.
I even think that when they're writing the characters, they're thinking of the characters that they've seen in the other movie.
Right? They have to be, right?
Yeah, they have to be. Because a lot of times they don't have personal experience. So they're going on what they've seen or heard. And that was a beautiful thing about Pose, right? They were taking real life issues and moments and being able to translate it onto the screen. So how could we not feel it? Because we know it.
Right.
We know those characters. We know those people. And that's what I think Chris did for a lot of people. People knew Chris. They knew the little young gay boy who liked to dress up in drag and took care of his friends, right? And, go to the clubs and stuff. So they knew who that character was. That's why they had a connection.
Yeah. This is a good moment to circle back to a point you made earlier, which is I feel like today we look at a character like Crystal, we look at a character, even all of the drag characters in To Wong Foo, this conversation happens, and then we've heard this, I feel like, with Holiday Heart in some ways, but like this looking at those characters today as potentially trans characters. Back then they were called drag queens. Even the Lady Chablis in Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, textually most of these characters are just drag queens, and then you have these sly moments here and there that might speak to a more lived life in those particular ways. But one of the questions I wanted to ask you, as an actress yourself, as somebody who has played, both, drag queens and then also trans women who might be read as drag queens in culture, as we talk about a shift in language that has happened over the last 30, 40 plus years. I wonder how that hits for you as an actress.
You know, I heard this TED Talk where this woman was saying we live in a time and space where everything needs to be categorized.
Yeah.
You know, it's not about how we feel. It's more about what we're thinking, right? And if it doesn't make sense to me, then it's not right? If I can't identify what it is, I need to know that is a man. I need to know that as a man in a dress, right? You got me. I don't want to, have to think about it, right? But you must be thinking all the time, right? We have to. We can't be so complacent, right? We got to know that this is not be all end all. Excuse me, and it has been challenging. People ask me, when did you become trans? I was like, people have been transitioning my whole life.
Yeah.
My whole life. I'm just, learning different ways of navigating through the world. But when I show up, for the work, I'm showing up as an actor. Who do you need me to be in this role? Who is she? Let me know. Give me some context. But right now, I'm grateful for everything that has transpired and the way it's transpired, right? But right now we're still in this teachable moment. We're still not getting a chance to be everything, right? But it's slowly we're shifting. There's a real beautiful shift. And I'm so happy it's making everyone so nervous, right? People don't want to wake up. You got to wake up. And so that was the power of Pose. Pose laid the foundation for Clean Slate, right? Because now we get to laugh. We get to, it gets to be lighter. You already know how it works. Now you get to hear it from someone else. For me, there should be a trans person on every single one of these shows that needs just to humanize the experience. Little trans boy, little non-binary, and lots more people of color doing it, right? Because we do it differently. I notice a lot of times that even Succession, they had someone non-binary. But could you imagine they brought in someone of color? I know it doesn't fit, the right, but just to shake up the foundation a little bit, and make you should be questioning who is this character, and why are they there, the whole time, and be wondering how is this character going to develop? I had an opportunity to be on Clean Slate, and I was like, cool, you're the bar matron, you own your own bar. I was like, let's do it. She's an answered prayer. Do you know what I'm saying? Let's make it happen. And so, all those, you asked me earlier, are all those characters woven together? Yes, they are. Because someone has seen, or has experienced, that archetype. Right? And so, I hope that answers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Did you want to say?
I was just gonna say, I often talk about how drag characters are also sites of possibility for trans women in films. The character is a man in a dress, absolutely. And also, I think many trans, non-binary, queer, folks look at these characters and are also able to cling on to slices of them for how we actualize our own lives and how we move through our own lives. And I feel like Noxeema, even Holiday, I use Holiday Heart, baby. Holiday Heart has a very special place in my heart.
Right.
Okay. Shout out to, all of them. But, I just feel like many of these characters that we might even in popular conversation today look back at with a complex, feeling about that they also can be, visibility of sorts for parts of us.
Yeah.
Yeah. And my whole thing is, everything's so fast with the social media and so readily available.
So
right?
instant, yeah.
So instant. And so oftentimes people don't do homework. But everybody gets brought into the room, right, when it's time to play. So I'm bringing Miss Celie in. I'm bringing 2 Tears and a bucket motherfucker.
Okay.
Right.
Do you know what I'm saying? I'm
Yeah.
bringing everyone that has inspired me in some capacity, right? Male or female, right? I just think it's important to allow artists, performers, to play, right? And to explore and experience all aspects of the character they're asked to present.
I think that's interesting, right? This idea, you were saying this before, and I've been like stewing on it since you said it. This idea of kind of like, you know, maybe when you perform the role, you didn't have whether it's this thing or that thing. And then it's kind of up to the audience to kind of, you know what I mean? The audience obviously ends up kind of projecting whatever they want to see onto it for whatever they need to your point, Tre'vell, right? But I think that is very true about sometimes the experience. I have a friend who, this is a personal story, but, you know, I've known her since I was in South Carolina. When I used to live in South Carolina, we moved to New York. And, you know, to me, she's always been she, her, because I refer to most of my friends as she, her. You know, gender regardless, I refer to most of my friends as she, her. And, you know, when we first met, she used to get in drag. We would go out, and then, you know, she got out of drag. And then I moved here, and then years later, I moved to New York, and then years later, she moved to New York. And I went to introduce her to someone else. And at first I was like, oh, well, I guess you should say he, him. And then I started thinking about it, and I was like, I actually haven't seen her get out of drag in a while. And I hadn't realized that, like, my friend had transitioned, and I simply didn't know, because to me, she had always been this, you know what I mean? She had always been she, her to me. So, but anyways, I say that to say that, like, just like in projects that happens in real life, where it's like, there are periods where it's like, it's not clear because you don't have the conversation, especially when you're just around community and friends. It's like everybody who sees you knows what it is, even if they haven't put, to your point, a label on it or a word on it, right? And I have never thought about it in that way before, but I think that's true, that it is true to the experience of life, that not everyone, you know, comes forward with a label or a category. They just sort of live, and everything else comes after.
And oftentimes we don't afford people the opportunity to transition or to transform. Right? You either got to go from this and automatically into this, you know, glamazon.
Yeah.
And that is not transitioning.
Right.
That's an aspect of transitioning, but that's not transitioning, because everything is transitioning. Everything around you is transitioning. Everyone in your life is transitioning, right? So, yeah, we have to afford people the opportunity to tell us who they are, and not hope and wish they're going to be something that we want or show up the way we. Because, you know, oftentimes I hear people say, "Don't embarrass me." What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? Are you defining my transness by a visual aspect of me? You're not allowing me to, you know, show up, you know, as me.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Were you defining me by a wig? Or you defining me by my body? You know, I always say this. At one time, you know, trans women were dying to be beautiful, literally. You know, and we're seeing some of the results now with the injections and the hormone. You know, we're seeing it, right? Where it's rejecting, you know, in their body, and it's like that's not fair, right? We're trying to live up to someone else's standard of beauty or idea of what we should be. You know, I always say, if you want to explore it, go, run, but for you, you know. And so that is got me sometime, you know, on the edge, you know, living on the edge of things, because, you know, they may not see me today as being trans enough. You know what I'm saying? So you're always, you know, got to prove, honey, I'm trans.
Right.
You know, are you defining me by these breasts? Are you know, what are you defining me by? You know, and so that's the beauty of someone like Laverne hiring me to be, you know, on her show. Like, she's just allowing the trans folks to come, you know, and do what they do. And that's what the importance of even you holding space here for someone like me is, that we stay in conversation, so we create a larger space and platform for people to walk in and say, me too. I want to play too.
And I think what's so beautiful about that, and what you said, Mikelle, also, right, is it actually doesn't matter. So we should say, one of a conversation that Mikelle and I were going back and forth with in wanting to bring up Crystal and Punks is, to us, she's one of the girls. You know what I mean? She's one of the girls.
Right.
But, in the film, and you look up the IMDb, it say the character's name is Chris/Crystal.
Yeah.
In, scripturally.
Right. Yeah.
But to us, she one of the girls.
But also, to be clear, if you never look at that, she's Crystal.
Absolutely.
The entire film.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there was just one time.
Absolutely.
I came in like some sweatpants and a little hat with bring some food in. But other than that, I was never out of geek.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, to what I was saying about my friend, right? It's like, I realized, I was like, no, I've never seen her not.
But that is what I feel like me specifically, or general, we are doing with a character like Noxeema and the other drag queens in that film specifically. I feel like every 2 years, somebody's writing up an article about how these are trans women and not just drag queens. But I feel like that's what we're doing with those characters, right? It's like we are looking at what we know now. We're looking at the fact that you don't see any of them out of, drag until, except at the very beginning when they're getting in it. And then they go through, they drive across the whole country and get her. Okay.
In full.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. And I think like those are the things that we're looking at now and saying, this is a little bit more than, and we can say that now, that this is more than just perhaps a drag persona, right? And this is actually perhaps a lived identity.
Right.
Well, as we say goodbye and thank you for being here, I just want to say on a personal note, I'm very big about giving people their flowers. And I know a lot of young kids may not know you and your impact in your work, but you've definitely seen her. I know you have. And so we are so grateful that you gave us some of your time to come talk about these characters. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
I appreciate you.
Thank you so much to our guest this week, and thank you for tuning in to Black Queer Canon. Make sure to subscribe here on our YouTube channel and check back next week for our next episode.
Black Queer Canon is a production of Slayzhon. It is created, hosted, and executive produced by Mikelle Street and Tre'vell Anderson. Chris Rodgers is our associate producer and editor. For more Black Queer Canon, visit us at blackqueercanon.com. You can also follow the show on IG at Slayzhon and subscribe to our Slayzhon YouTube page to watch the video versions of our episodes weekly. Black Queer Canon is supported by Critical Minded, an initiative to invest in cultural critics of color, co-founded by the Nathan Cummings Foundation and the Ford Foundation.